Good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today, both for those who are joining us in person and online. We have a little bit of a different format today because for those of y'all who are observing Ramadan, we will be breaking just before fasting time, so that we'll have my introduction, we'll have the book discussion, and then we'll have a pause so that people can break their fast before we move on to the Q&A. So, thank you so much for joining us for this book launch discussion of Professor Brian Barber's No Way But Forward, Life Stories of Three Families in the Gaza Strip. My name is Fadi Qafaiti, and I'm the Executive Director of the Jerusalem Fund. I want to thank both of our boards here at the Jerusalem Fund and the Institute for Palestine Studies for making this event possible, and most importantly, to our incredible teams for facilitating all of this. Before we begin today's event, I just wanted to express our horror at the resumption of Israel's all-out war on Gaza. The genocide, of course, as we noted, didn't end with the implementation of the ceasefire on January 19th. And throughout this extremely fragile and precarious period, one side violated the ceasefire over 960 times. One side repeatedly targeted and killed and massacred civilians. And one side openly declared their intention of resuming the war. This is the side of the colonizer. This is only the beginning, they announced, as they committed the largest massacre of children in 2025, less than 2 days ago, as they slept in the middle of the night. At the same time, we were facing a wave of repressions, expulsions, arrests, and deportations here in the United States for voices, pro-Palestinian and Palestinian voices who speak up against this genocide. For more on these two, we have a webinar on Friday at noon that I direct our audience to. You can find the registration on our website and on social media. Before I turn to our discussants, I want to read the statement by our senior fellow, Saeed Arakat, who had to step down from presenting today at the very last minute and could not be with us in person. Our thoughts are with him, and we hope that he'll be joining us for the next event. But in the meantime, I'll just be reading out his remarks on Professor Brian's latest monograph. So, I now begin by quoting him. Let me begin by expressing my sincere apologies to the Jerusalem Fund, our honorable guest, Brian Barber, and to those participating at this event for failing to be with you in person. While Brian Barber's seminal book, No Way But Forward, explores the life stories of three families in the Gaza Strip, we must remember that all has happened to Gazans, all that has happened to Gazans and in Gaza since Brian stopped recording their testimonies in October 2024, and since the book was published shortly after. Gaza is currently enduring the full force of an Israeli genocidal war with the most lethal and advanced American weapons, with America's green light, and with an American-led political cover to do it so cynically. We must remember that since this compelling book was published, many Hammams, Khalils, Hussams, and their families have perished because both the US and Israel have declared that Gazans face forced expulsion or death that awaits them. President Trump has repeatedly announced that he will save the, quote, unlucky Gazans from their pitiable destruction that has somehow beset them by expelling them, taking ownership of the Gaza Strip and beautifying it for the world people under Trump Gaza. While this may be the most patently greedy and offensive plan for Palestinians yet, it's just the latest in a century-old official disparagement and abuse of a people who are deemed unworthy, as though they are unhuman. Gaza may be consistently in the news for all the atrocities and horrors that Israel conducts daily, though the truth is that few outside observers have spent as much time on the ground in Gaza exploring and propping this question as Brian Barber has. In his new book, Brian traces how three ordinary young Palestinian men have experienced life in Gaza over the past 30 years, from the First Intifada until the genocide that's currently ongoing. Their lives have been riddled with oppressive military constraint, violence, humiliation, and loss. Yet, along with their parents, wives, and children, they've persevered. These narratives are gripping tales of survival, endurance, and hope. Brian writes that Hammam, Khalil, and Hussam are, quote, ordinary people living in an extraordinary context, end quote. He tells us that all three Palestinian men who came of age during the First Intifada and the Israeli occupation of their homes in the Gaza Strip, and it provides an insightful introductory to readers with a historical context, emphasizing that this book is not about the Palestine-Israeli conflict. Instead, he emphasizes it's a story of resilience, survival, and trauma told from the perspective of its three main subjects. Brian's research on childhood trauma in war-torn environments, where he developed a close relationship to to these three young men, ranges from typical trials of adolescence, say for instance in Hammam's case, who spends his entire chapter stressing over his school exams, to confrontations with the Israeli military. In Brian's book underscores the fact that many of the stories told by the protagonists defy Western narratives about Palestinian youth. In addition to getting highlights of Khalil's day-to-day family life, readers learn its history of political activism as he tried to steer away from joining, quote, the front lines of the stones throwers to participate in behind-the-scenes organizations of demonstrations. As authors of many scholarly books on child, as the author of many scholarly books on childhood psychology, Brian approaches the stories of Hammam, Khalil, and Hussam with an empathetic style that gives them space to tell their own stories. The book's final section, not surprisingly, takes a look at the events of October 7th, 2023, from a Palestinian perspective, providing an intimate exploration of the ways in which the Israeli war, genocidal war that began, impacted the lives of three average Palestinian families. Although the book's engaging narrative is augmented by research footnotes, it does not read as an academic text. And by the way, I encourage everyone to buy a signed copy afterwards. The book includes photographs, maps, and other visual elements that complement its accessibility. Finally, this book has been described in so many ways that underscore its humanism and the story of Gaza and its incredible people. From being a labor of empathy, which it really is, to a work of immense beauty and humility, which profoundly is. But none as what Brian quotes Muhammad, the 23-year-old son of Khalil, whose life story he narrated as having written on April 4th, 2024, from their family tent in Al-Mawasi in southern Gaza. Sorry, none is more powerful. And quote, it ends with, resilience and determination to live with dignity burns within us. And with each passing day, hope is somehow maintained, and the will to move on grows despite all hardships. And Said ends by thanking you, Brian, for bringing us all closer to Gaza. So, with that, I turn to our distinguished guest and our panelist and our discussant today. So, Professor Brian Barber is a senior fellow at the Institute of Palestine Studies, and a senior scholar at the Middle East Policy Council. He's also Professor Emeritus of Child and Family Studies at the University of Tennessee, where he founded and directed the Center for the Study of Youth and Political Conflict. He's the editor of 2009 Oxford University Press volume on adolescence and war, and has regularly published studies on global youth, including on Palestinians, in leading academic outlets. And his writings and interviews, particularly in Gaza, have also appeared online in many outlets such as CNN, Haaretz, Palestine Square, Medium, Jadaliyya, and Open Democracy, and many more. Professor Barber's work has been supported by the Jacobs Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, the National Institute for Mental Health, the Foundation for Middle East Peace, and New America. And I should also say Professor Brian has also been a longtime guest and contributor here with us at the Palestine Center. His first event here was when I was just a little kid, only 4 years old in 1998, and he's been here many times since. He's given us an interview in 2016 and also had a major event here, which was recorded by C-SPAN in 2018, I believe. Yeah. And then also we're honored today to have Jihad Abu Salim with us once again, who's the executive director of the Institute for Palestine Studies in Washington, D.C. Jad's completing his PhD in Hebrew and Judaic Studies and History at New York University, and his research focuses on Palestinian and Arab writings and perceptions of the Zionist project before 1948. An accomplished writer and speaker, Jad combines his passion for Palestinian history with his commitment to change. In 2022, he co-edited the anthology Lights in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire, which was published by Haymarket Books. And in the interest of time, also, and by expressing my gratitude, because Jihad is my predecessor, and it's always lovely to have him back with us. So, with that, we will turn to our panelists, and thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Fadi. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. For those who saw me on my phone, since I sat here, I'm following the food delivery, so just making sure that those fasting and those who aren't will get to have, break their fast and have dinner tonight. So I can assure you that food is on the way. It's almost here, and we'll be here in time for iftar. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for coming to this important book event. And of course, I'm grateful for Dr. Brian Barber for being with us here tonight. And it's a pleasure to lead this conversation about his book, No Way But Forward. But before I begin, I would like to reiterate what Fadi talked about, and before that, of course, I would like to thank the Jerusalem Fund for hosting this event, and it's the collaboration between IPS and the Jerusalem Fund is just starting. So we promise more events in the future. Unfortunately, we're having this conversation while many Hammams, Khalils, and Hussams and their families in Gaza are experiencing the resumption. I wouldn't say the resumption of the genocide, because the genocide never stopped. Israel continued violating the ceasefire, continued killing people, continued blocking aid, and what resumed is the large-scale killing of hundreds of people in the matter of hours and over the course of days. So we're talking today about the lives of people who Dr. Barber describes and has written about in his book. And these are just the rich and beautiful and resilient lives of just 3 individuals and their families. So you can imagine the countless stories and individuals and families that are experiencing so much pain, as a result of the resumption of Israel's large-scale bombardment of Gaza. So, we're talking about this as we mourn and as we keep Gaza in our hearts and on our minds. And of course, at a very difficult moment here and in Palestine. So, Dr. Barber, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Your book, No Way But Forward, brings us into the lives of 3 remarkable men, Palestinian men, Hammam, Khalil, and Hussam, each navigating the profound struggles and quiet victories of life in Gaza. Hammam, the social and ambitious young man shaped by his father's imprisonment and detention. Khalil, whose resilience and pursuit of education and knowledge has defined his path. And Hussam, whose perseverance through hardship reflected on his daily reality, and like many in the Gaza Strip. Before we dive deeper into the book, the writing process, the gaps that the book is trying to address, could you introduce us to these 3 men, Hammam, Khalil, and Hussam? Could you introduce us to them in your own words? who they are, what makes their stories compelling, and why you chose them as the heart of your book. And to set the stage, would you be willing to read an excerpt that captures a defining moment in one of their lives?
Yes. First, thank you. Is mic working good? Well, thank you to so many, to Jihad Institute for Palestine Studies, for FADI, Jerusalem Fund, Palestine Center, both of your staffs, to Saeed, who wrote that lovely introduction, um, and to you for coming um, tonight. I wish I could be more upbeat, but as you know, that's not possible right now. I don't need to repeat what Fadi and Jihad just said, um, only to say to you that I've been in touch with my three characters all day today, so I can, update you on how they're doing at this very moment, sometime in the discussion. So these are three kind of ordinary young men that I met in their early 20s in 1994, 5. I was engaged in a very rigorous research project. I'm a social psychologist by training, and having studied Gaza and Palestinians, I'm also a political psychologist and cultural psychologist, and you name it. And so most of my time in Gaza, beginning in 1996, actually 1995, was conducting this broad-scale research on young people of the First Intifada. I came to study them originally because the First Intifada had just ended, and there were concerns by some that the Palestinian family had suffered in structure because of the great autonomy young men in particular, but also young women exercised during the Intifada, going to the streets and throwing stones and the like. And so I and a team of sociologists began a very elaborate long-scale study of that cohort, that generation of stone throwers, as we called them. I came to know these three in the course of that research, and decided to focus on them. Well, I should say originally, when this book came to mind, which was just 10 years ago, I had planned to narrate the lives of 6 young men, and boy, am I happy I didn't do 6, because it's difficult to write a narrative of one person over 30 years, let alone 6. But I decided to focus on these 3 just because they, while on paper they're identical, all raised in the Gaza Strip in refugee camps, similar age, identical vision as all Palestinians have of what's right and what is deserved, but that they are different substantially in personality and the decisions they made, the timing of their priorities, and so forth. The book is full of very human, sometimes dramatic, sometimes not dramatic stories of people living their lives from day to day, through the periodic onslaughts, which, as you know, got worse and worse over time. And I would have really loved to read an excerpt or a chapter of that kind of, not happy-go-lucky, but, easy life that would help you understand just how fully human Palestinians are. But it just doesn't fit today. So I'm going to read you a chapter from Hussam, because it will sound familiar to what's happening today, and ironically enough, familiar what's happening even in our own country. So I'll stay here and read this chapter. So this is October 1989. Hussam is 16. Ferris's lesson came none too soon. Ferris is his father. Barely a month later, now 2 years into the Intifada, the family was shocked out of their sleep by the dreaded bam, 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 bam. There was no mistaking who was at the door. The soldiers with their hardwood batons were the only ones who came at 2 in the morning, the only ones who banged so fiercely on the door. Ferris's stomach tightened and his jaw clenched. Here we go again, he thought. He didn't want to be hauled off to detention yet again. Because he was an outspoken critic of the occupation, the IDF often detained him for a day or so to keep him under surveillance. They would also detain him the day before any Palestinian anniversary that would bring protests. Don't they get it, he thought. This intimidation does not work. He flipped on the single naked bulb lighting the entrance, opened the heavy front door, and solemnly addressed the captain of the soldiers. What is it that you want this time, Captain? Asked Ferris. But this time the captain's reply was unexpected. Do you have sons? He asked Ferris dispassionately. Oh, geez, thought Ferris, here we go again with the games. Yes, Captain, I have 6 sons, as you can see before you, Ferris retorted as he waved his arm dramatically toward all 6 of them. As they often did, the children were sleeping together on mats in the ground floor salon, where there was a TV. You've seen them before on your many past visits, of course. Tell me their names. Ferris let out a long, resigned breath and went through the motions, pointing out each son as he ticked off their names, beginning with the farthest away. Well, there's Ashraf, then Muhammad, then Allah, then Omar. Where's Hussam? The officer interrupted. Right here, in fact, said Ferris, gesturing not far from his feet. Ignoring Ferris's protest, the officer switched his stare to Hussam. Get ready. We want to take you for just 5 minutes or so. Now 16, Hussam had acquired a lot of experience out on the streets. He knew risk, but he had never been captured before. And even though he had seen this drill during the many times Ferris had been pulled from home and brought to detention, and had heard about it in countless tales told by relatives and neighbors, he suddenly realized that he had no idea what was going to happen to him. Somber as he stepped around the other kids on his way to the bedroom to get dressed, Hussam worried about how long he would be gone. He knew, of course, that the 5-minute announcement was nonsense, but how long would they keep him? Would it be just for a few hours or overnight, as they kept Ferris so many times? Pulling on his jeans and t-shirt, he wondered when he would next sleep in that room. Would it be the 18-day detention that so many people reported? He took it to the extreme, contemplating the worst-case scenario of ending up in prison for months, even years. This demoralized him. How can I possibly live so long away from my parents? How are my brothers and sisters going to grow up without my care? And my God, my education, will I ever be able to catch up on my schooling? As he stepped back through the long faces in the hallway, everyone was silent except for the whimpering of the youngest kids. At the open door, Rasmia hugged him and Ferris squeezed his shoulder, both assuring him, "Don't worry, son. Everything will be okay. We love you. We'll be here waiting for you. Be strong." Just a few meters outside the doorway, the captain wrapped the cotton blindfold around Hussam's head, pulled his arms behind his back, placed white plastic zip tie handcuffs around his wrist, and cinched them into the skin. Hussam didn't resist. There would have been no point. 2 soldiers gripped his armpits, pushed him toward the waiting jeep, and then threw him onto its bed. He collided with 2 other boys who were already there, and he assumed that they must also be part of the roundup. During the 15-minute drive south to the military complex in Khan Yunis, everyone was silent, with the soldiers riding in the bed of the jeep using the captives as footrests during the ride. Soldiers took the 3 boys roughly by the arms as they exited the jeep, Still silent, the soldiers marched them forward and then yanked the boys' blindfolds off their heads. They were standing outside one of the several large canvas tents that filled the courtyard. A soldier unlocked the door, slashed the white zip ties, and pushed the boys into one of the tents. Inside the tent, many young people were lying on soiled bed mats set on top of simple wooden bed frames. The beds were wide enough to sleep two. Hussam counted 12 beds. He calculated 2 people per bed times 12 beds equals 24. He counted 50 boys. For the first 11 days, the routine was horribly monotonous. They did nothing other than force down the stale bread, sometimes rotting eggs, and gulp down the water that a guard would bring them at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. on the dot. Then at 8 p.m., they'd walk single file to the squatter toilet in the shed at the corner of the courtyard, where the stench was stomach churning and a horde of huge flies whirred maniacally. The boys would talk, of course, and try to humor themselves with jokes and games, but they said little about any political activity. They all understood that one or more of them could have been planted as coerced informants, collaborators. For no discernible reason, on day 12, things changed. In the early morning after the boys had eaten, soldiers began taking Hussam and a few of the others out of the tent and placed each of them individually next to the buildings encircling the courtyard. On that day and those that followed, the boys were ordered to assume a sitting position there, but without anything to sit on. And they were forced to stay there, sometimes for the entire day, their bare feet often directly on the sharp stones that were spread about a meter wide from the wall of the buildings. From his forced sitting position in the courtyard, Hussam could hear shrieks coming from an interrogation room inside a building. But one day, when he was placed directly below the window of an interrogation room, he heard every word and sound. The officer spoke Arabic. "Stand up straight. Confess that you threw stones 2 weeks ago." Pause. The sound of a thump. Maybe the baton on flesh, upper arms, lower back, wondered Hussam. The boy grunted. "Confess, punk. Thump, thump." A louder grunt. Okay, please stop hitting me. Yes, I threw stones. Thump. You dare throw stones at our sacred soldiers? Thump, thump, thump. A long scream. Tell us the names of the others who were with you. Thump, grunt. No, please, sir, the boy begged. I can't. Thump. Please, sir, I can't give names. Whack, whack, whack. Maybe on bone now, knees, head. Sharper screams. God Almighty, please stop hitting me, sir. Okay, Bilal S. was with me. Who else? Whack, scream, whack, scream. Omar A. was also there. Whack. Please, sir, I can't take this anymore. A dull thump. Maybe a knee to the groin. A gut-wrenching shriek. Names, goddammit. Whack, whack, whack. Louder shrieks. And on it went, through as many as 20 names, most of them probably fake, thought Hussam, because he recognized only a few of them. Finally, the captive spurted out, bloodied mouth most likely. "I can't take it anymore. I'll sign whatever you want. I'll confess to anything. Just give me the paper. I'll sign it. I beg you, please just let me go." At one point, a terrifying rumor began circulating around those waiting to be interrogated. "We've heard that they'll jam the stylus of a pen right into your dick." Beyond the utter shame he would suffer if they exposed his privates, the thought of the pain that such defilement would bring made Hussam feel as if his slim body had been electrocuted. A few days later, his whole body quivered when Hussam was ushered into a room for his own interrogation. With the benefit of the preview, he knew what was coming, but that made it even worse. He had never been beaten before. Wondering if he'd be able to avoid pissing himself, he cringed as the dour interrogator entered the bare, white-walled room where Hussam had been ordered to stand, handcuffed and flanked by 2 junior officers, the ones who would beat him. On the walk to the interrogation room, Hussam had burned into his mind a stern and insistent mantra from his father's lessons: confess to nothing, give no one away. Thank God he had such good mind control, because everything he was expecting to happen came blasting at him. He had guessed right. They began with the soft tissues of the upper arms, thighs, calves, and lower back, relentlessly pounding him with their batons after his every denial. No, I didn't participate in throwing stones. No, I don't know anyone who did. No, I'm not involved in fighting you. They also choked him blue and whacked his knees with their wooden sticks. He guessed right again. The dull thump he'd heard was a soldier's knee directly to the groin. The searing, convulsing pain was the worst agony he had ever experienced. Through his own grunts, screams, shrieks, and tears, Hussam's relentless wholesale denial seemed to throw the interrogator off. Who are your friends? I don't have friends. How come you don't have friends? My studies are the most important thing to me. I only go out to buy things for my family. Then the predictable shift to Ferris, his father. Well, what about your father? My father is a teacher and a good football player. He has nothing to do with this. Who are his friends? I don't know. Do you see anything, any people coming, plotting things? No, I haven't seen anything. Do you? Do you? Do you? No, no, no. Then back over the same territory again and again. Do you know any people who were involved in this uprising? No, I don't know any such people. He could tell he was winning the battle when the bribes and threats began. You know, we can arrest your father if you don't tell us what we want. Do as you must. You know, we can release you if you tell us who they are. I don't know any such people. We can keep you in prison forever. Well, I have nothing to say. That's up to you. I haven't done anything. After a couple of hours, two soldiers dragged Hussam back to his tent. His legs pounded blue. He was unable to stand, let alone to walk. Although the two boys who had taken him from the soldiers tried their hardest to be gentle, Hussam screamed in pain as they set him down on one of the beds in the tent. Every centimeter of his body was on fire. Although no one could have detected it through his battered face, Hussam smiled to himself and wept. I did it. I did my duty. I confessed to nothing and gave no one away. They are not invincible. I beat them. They let him go on day 18.
And this is just a glimpse of and when Palestinians look back at the first Intifada and compare it with the second, and then they compare the second Intifada with the later uh, you know uh, bombardment episodes, the mowing the lawn campaigns, and then now today we look back at those campaigns and compare to what we are going through today and what is happening to Palestinian prisoners in Israel's detention camps in Sdeti Man and other um, detention centers and detention camps. This was powerful, and of course, it, it's hard to hear a story like this, a testimony like this, and just move on to the next question. But I think it is important to continue our conversation um, and to and given this glimpse that you've provided about just a brief what would count as a brief moment from the long and eventful lives of one of the characters, one of these three men that you talk about in your book. Um, we'll get back to Mahmoud, to Hammam, Khalil, and Hussam shortly. I want to step away from the specific stories of each of these characters and talk a little bit about the book itself as a project. Um, this is not just a book that retells the stories of people in a compelling, literary flow. It is also um, a piece of literature that also captures and documents important moments in the history of Gaza, and in the many histories and stories of Palestinians there. Um, so, if could you tell us a little bit, Dr. Barber, about the the moment or experience that convinced you to dedicate all these years to following these individuals and their families, and eventually write this book?
There wouldn't be a single moment. There were a series of moments, but it began when we first went to the West Bank and East Jerusalem in 1994 to start that large survey research project. I was then a young assistant professor and had traveled extensively to all over the world, and so was not. It wasn't foreign to me to go to a new place, but I came with the stereotypes that all of us in the West consume from the pundits and the so-called experts, who in fact really know nothing about what life is like on the ground, but we consume them because we trust, or at least I used to trust these. So the first experience was just encountering a remarkably humble, um, hospitable, generous, clear-eyed people who so contradicted the stereotype of these angry, violent, revengeful Palestinians who are, something different than us white people. It was startling, and the whole research team felt the same way, and frankly, everyone I've ever known who's gone to Palestine experiences the same thing. The second thing I would say is that scientifically, I had been trained in mental health, that a traumatic moment in anyone's life, a child, even an adult, can bring serious psychological and social difficulty, PTSD even. But here was a population of young people who had just been through 6 years of often daily violent encounters, experiencing things like Hussam did, which was not at all unusual. So I expected them to be really messed up, to be frank. I, the enlightened professor from the United States, bringing my theories with me, I thought, okay, I'm getting myself geared up for a really tough moment here. But our research produced results which completely contradicted that presumption. This was a group of young people in their teens, excuse me, who were motivated, eager, respectful, hopeful for the future, wanting peace, high self-esteem, you name the indicator, and they were doing as well as anyone in the 15 cultures of young people I've studied. And so these two shocks to my system told me there's something that I really want to pursue here. And the decision to go to Gaza was because I quickly realized that as marvelous as our data set was and still is, up to 10,000 families with a teenage kid and both parents, I needed to get much, much deeper into the culture before I could even presume to write authoritatively. And so I decided the deepest I could go would be a refugee camp in Gaza. And I started a series of residences there in 1996. between 1996 and 2000, I estimated, or I calculated I was there 40% of my time, always living with families in or near camps. And my uh, requirements or expectations were that these would be families that would allow me to experience as much of their life as possible, one of whom would speak English well enough to start teaching me Arabic. It was Hammam's family, which was my first family that I ever lived with, and Fuad, his father, was the one who taught me English as we walked around Khan Yunis camp, buying hummus. Right. So I would say it was the shock of ignorance and the passion to really understand and report on phenomena that I thought were meaningful.
No, absolutely. And as someone from Gaza who grew up there, I lived in Gaza for most of my life until I left in 2013. Um, it wasn't until I left that I was able to understand the place where I grew up and I lived in with more clarity and more nuance and perspective because I was able to, uh, take a step back and zoom out and look at all of these experiences that I myself went through and people around me went through. Um, and I agree with you that when it comes to Gaza, there is a lot of ignorance, whether intentional or unintentional. Um, it, you know, we're in a world today where there is active denial every day of by many, individuals online and in different types of circles and contexts. Not only that these people refuse to, delve deeper into the experiences and stories and the histories and contexts that relate to Palestinians in Gaza. They they deny even that hundreds of people were killed. They say, we can't trust these reports. It's as if Palestinians in Gaza and Palestinians in general and oppressed people in general, they have nothing to do but to, spend the rest of their lives just to be a nuisance and a footnote in the lives that matter
Yeah.
from the point of view of those people. Um, but I would like to address the issue of ignorance, but from a different perspective here. I mean, this is a book that tells stories, but it's also rooted in your, academic training and expertise. And it provides an intervention. It provides an intervention by telling these stories. So, based on the years you spent reading and writing and documenting these stories, can you talk a little bit about how your work challenges certain narratives about Gaza and about Palestinian life in general, and what gaps in knowledge or scholarship about Gaza you were most determined to address with this book? And before we proceed with the answer, I just want to announce that the food is here. We'll continue with our conversation. So, for those who would like to break their fast, once our colleagues prepare everything, please go ahead and, start by breaking your fast. But, feel free also to join us as we continue this event. I, just had water, so I'll eat after. But again, so gaps in knowledge, gaps in scholarship, gaps in understanding Gaza. How does your work challenge these dominant narratives? And and how did you deal with those gaps in literature and scholarship in understanding Gaza as a place, as people, and as part of the Palestinian story in general?
Well, it's pathetic, isn't it, that one has to say that one of the major goals of this book is to convince human beings that other human beings are human beings. Even in Hussam, I can recall Hussam way back when he was describing his Intifada experience. He described being called subhuman by an Israeli soldier, and that characterization remains today, as we can confirm with the reports of Israeli leaders. So one one thing I really hope that people take away from this book, if nothing else, is that Palestinians, and we'll talk a lot about Gazans today, but I want to make clear that Palestinians everywhere in the other territories experience maybe some differences in types, but every much persecution that Gazans do, especially now with the cleansing of the West Bank. You take away that these are real people, these are real honorable, really intelligent people. People are shocked to hear that the literacy rate in Palestine, including Gaza, has always been above 95%, 97%. That's some of the highest in the world. Brilliant, capable people who have this ability somehow to push forward. No Way But Forward is not an accidental title. It's a rough translation of a common saying that a Palestinian would give to a trauma or a tragedy that just occurred. Ich bin Nensawi. What else can we do but move forward? And so, in that sense, it's a message of persistence. I don't like to use the word resilience very often because it has some connotations which aren't appropriate, but I like to use resourcefulness, persistence, steadfastness, who will keep moving forward because they see no other option. I remember talking to a man's father once, who had asking him, how can you have a satisfied life? How can you be happy here? And he said, we are as satisfied as the conditions allow us to be. And they have a life. Well, until recently, they had a life. Nice homes on the inside, great food, senses of humor. I mean, really just better than normal people. That's what I want people to know, that they're human, that they're bright, that they're capable, that they have ambition, and that they will not be beaten.
Um, how do you see, or before I get to this question, can you talk a little bit about the process of how did the process of writing this book evolve over time? And for those who got their copies, and I encourage you to get your copy today, you will notice that this is a self-published book. I mean, for a book that tells these stories, that captures these years of experiences, that provides, you know, this unique perspective into the lives of individuals and families in a place like Gaza throughout these important moments. Um, can you tell us a little bit why it is self-published?
I can. First of all, the book was not an original goal of mine. I was a social scientist and I came to do research, and I did good research with good funding with the great research teams. It wasn't until, as I said, about 10 years ago when I actually was about to retire and decided I'd written enough and published enough in scholarly journals that I decided that I had I had unique knowledge. Not many people have been on the ground as much as I have. So, and I recalled the one thing that Palestinians have ever asked of me, and there's only one thing. After the decades of generosity, hospitality, of respect, of not holding me to my government's, what shall we say, um, misbehavior, the only thing they ever asked of me was, please tell our story. And I thought, I'm obliged to do that. I'm happy to do that, but I also am obliged to do that because I know some things. So that's when the idea of the book came. Um, and I was, I'm not going to be too detailed on this, but um, I was a fellow at New America at the time when the book idea germinated. And before long, I was um, referred to a top literary agent in the United States, and eventually 3 more. And I went through years of working with them to create a book. When you write a book of nonfiction, unlike fiction, you don't write the whole book first. You write a book proposal with the help of literary agents, and that's kind of a mini book. And we worked on that proposal for years. And I'll just say this, that one of those agents told me, frankly, she said, I'll just be frank with you. This book will not sell as well as other books. And I should be accurate, he wouldn't even market it to publishers unless it had the endorsement of several prominent Jews. Which was really bizarre. First of all, I know several prominent Jews who already have happily endorsed the book. But that's the whole problem in a nutshell. A Palestinian voice can't be heard but through a Jewish filter. Others of them shockingly told me that the narratives weren't familiar enough.
For a reason.
They weren't familiar enough, and I needed to pull more out of them, as if these people knew more than I did, that would be familiar to Americans and that conformed with traditional psychology.
Yeah.
So it was a real battle to get through. And then finally, as soon as October 7th happened, I realized this is urgent. And I sat down and completed the book and published it through Amazon for expediency sake, and was able to get it out fairly quickly. And I'll be in London in a few weeks meeting with another literary agent, and he's confident that we might find a UK publisher for the book.
Best of luck with that one. I want to go back to and before we open it for questions from the audience, and I also want to acknowledge that we have more than 500 people tuning in live.
No?
So, just sending our regards to all of those who are with us online. And and just to let them know that if they have any questions they have for Dr. Barber, to post them as replies on on the live streams that we have on Twitter, whether it's Palestine Studies or the Palestine Center Twitter accounts. 620. There you go. I want to go back to the to Khalil, Hammam, and Hussam. And by the way, as someone who worked in the Gaza NGO scene, Khalil Abu Shamala was, a name that everybody was and is still familiar with. He's still in Gaza, right?
Gaza.
He's still in Gaza. I believe he was displaced from Gaza City um,
At least 5 times.
5 times. So the three men, Khalil, Hussam, and Hammam, are still in the Gaza Strip.
All three are still there.
Okay.
As I said, I conversed with them today at length. Khalil is, for the longest time, was in a tent in Al-Mawasi, Khan Yunis, but then later moved his family to a primitive shelter in Nusayrat, where they have at least a roof over their head. They remain there. They've been gathering funds to restore their apartment in Gaza City to move back into. They were about ready to do that, literally, last week. And Khalil told me today, my words, that he's beside himself, not knowing what to do and what will happen. Hussam is in his parents' home, where I first met him and interviewed him in Magazi camp. His own home, which he built late in life, just a few years ago, was badly damaged in Khan Yunis town. And so he's the same situation. He's trying to find money and materials. Even if they had money, where are the materials to rebuild his home? Hammam, I knew in Khan Yunis camp also, and his family was able to build a home 10 years or so ago outside in Khan Yunis town. And he was displaced, I forget how many times, but he's now back in that home, able to fix it up a bit, but no water, no electricity, no fuel.
And just to give people perspective, the three of them were born in refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. And they were when, how old? I mean, roughly, like, are they the same age?
Yeah, roughly.
Like, so, they're born in the 70s, late. Okay,
Mhm.
so they were born to, they were the grandchildren of people probably who were expelled in 1948.
Exactly.
They were born in refugee camps in the Gaza Strip. And uh, they they opened, like we say in Arabic, they opened their eyes unto the world. And the first big event that they witnessed was the first Intifada. So just to give people a sense of what time, what the passage of time looked like for those men. So the first big event is the first Intifada, and then Oslo happens. And then, there's a brief period of calm, even though it also, it was filled with Israeli violations and aggression, to be followed by the second Intifada. And then the second Intifada ends. And after that, the blockade begins. And throughout the blockade, those men and their families, they saw the 2008, 2009 war, the 2012, 2014, many escalations throughout 2018, 2019, the March of Return. I'm sure they had relatives who lost their limbs or were killed. And then the 2021 war,
Yes.
and then followed by a series of escalations until the ongoing genocide. Um, I did not prepare this question, and before I, open it for Q&A from our audience, um, th- psychologists and people who, examine this issue in the Gaza Strip, I mean, I've heard this many times that when it comes to Gaza, the concept of PTSD, as in the use of post, does not apply to Gaza.
That's one of the reasons it doesn't apply.
But can you elaborate more? Like, how do we, how, I mean, I spent 2 decades of my life, part of them was next to an Israeli settlement, after which I experienced some of the wars I described, uh, and I'm still haunted by, an experience. I was still, lucky compared to many in Gaza. My parents were working. I received, quality education and so on, and then I had the opportunity to leave. But like thinking, how do we deal with this endless cycle? And how do people who study this scientifically, who look at it, and especially this current moment, how do you think this will impact families, children, generations to come
Hmm.
in Gaza?
Well, just to dispense fully with PTSD as a construct, it's not only not post, but the D stands for disorder. What people in Gaza and Palestine and many other parts of the world, their suffering is not a disorder. It's normative suffering to conditions that any human being would suffer under. Um, and therefore, the treatment of it is not a therapy session or drugs.
Or painting?
Those help, especially for children. They help a lot. I don't want to disparage that. But the ultimate solution to the suffering is a change in the circumstances, right? And that has not changed. In fact, it's even worse now. So I wanted to just divert a little bit because, as you so correctly identified, the traumatic moments of their upbringing, I want to make sure that you realize that during that trajectory of ever declining conditions, um, both Hammam and Hussam have achieved their PhDs. They Hammam, by choice, even though he has a PhD, he still teaches at his favorite boys' school because he just loves to teach young people. Hussam is the assistant dean of a college in your hometown. Khalil had a long career as a top human rights activist in Gaza until he was taken down by the authorities, and since has had a successful life at doing various media things. They've married, they have wives they love to pieces, and have children. At least, let's see, at least four, 4 to 7 is the range of, 3 to 7 is the range of children. Uh, I want to emphasize all of that because they've made this work. As startling as it is to us, they've made it work in the sense that they're still alive, they're mostly still healthy, but no one can predict what's going to become of them emotionally and psychologically. Everything I've seen in them tells me that they will be, they'll keep going. Um, and, but none of us has experienced this level of destruction and deprivation. And so um, I have no predictions.
Yeah. Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. Barber. We'll open it now for our guests. Please, raise your hand if you have a question, introduce yourself, and you know, address your question, and then also for our audiences who are tuning in online, please feel free to submit any questions by replying to the live streams. So, yeah, floor is yours.
My name is Ann Wright, and I met you on Sunday morning when you attended an event at Busboys and Poets, and you mentioned your book. And you said, oh, it's available on Kindle and all. So I was interested because I've been to Gaza several times. And so I got the Kindle edition of it. And I'll just say, it is good. It is so interesting. And then, sorry, wait a minute. Sorry, can't get this off. And then, I don't want to gyp you by getting that Kindle free thing. So I ordered my book and it came in today. And but what I wanted to say was that, you have so much stuff in here. It's not only just about the cycle of these young men at various stages in their lives, but you add so much about the Palestinian culture and then a lot about history and footnotes that are hard to find on Kindle, but you can find them on the same page in this book. And I just want to thank you very, very much for the numbers of times that you went to Gaza and over the many, many years. And I found it to be an excellent, excellent book. And thank you for that. And we can tell, the trauma for you who have been there so much, and for all of us as we see all of the terrible things that are going on right now. So our hearts are with Gaza.
Thank you, and I'm very glad we met, and I really appreciate that you liked the book.
Anyway, thank you so much for this. I'm Diane Perlman, also a clinical and political psychologist, and discovered that we were at the same conference at the Gaza Community Mental Health Program in
What year was that?
1997 and 1999.
I was there too now.
Was that you? Oh, you're,
no.
and actually, I brought the book, and he has
I
a
was the-
chapter.
You were the kid screaming in the back.
I bought the proceedings, and and I came up with an alternative diagnosis to PTSD, which I call relentless ongoing traumatic suffering, which is, I welcome other ideas. And it's also not a disorder, but a psychic injury. And the cure is truth and justice and healing and a better reality. The other thing is that I've been understanding a lot about samud and steadfastness, and been very, very, very impressed by that, how people do that to withstand this. And I'm also a Jew, so I'm like related to the perpetrators, which is challenging and difficult and painful for me, and a responsibility that I take very serious. It's my biggest responsibility right now in my life. And I used to be part of a Holocaust research group of transcending trauma, and people who did better had like strong, early childhood experiences. So I get like how strong the families are. And I've also been going to conference the last few months with Doctors Against Genocide. So there are a lot of Palestinians, and we go out together. So I feel like I'm part of a Palestinian family. So I kind of feel that energy. And just in terms of your question about future, there's going to have to be some kind of process like truth commissions and justice and de-traumatization and new leadership and a better life and intentional interventions to prevent that. Thank you so much.
But first, freedom.
Freedom. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you. My name is Nilufar Ahmed. My question to you is, why there is so much ignorance about what is happening in Palestine to the Palestinian people? I came from abroad. This is my adopted country. So what struck me in US that somebody, sorry, I would not say that the people think that their community is the whole world. They don't know, they also don't want to know, majority of US citizens, what is happening outside. And I'm really appalled how the major media is covering the war in Gaza. Like, first I was sort of stunned that from CNN after October 7, there is a blast somewhere in Gaza City, but it is not a blast, it is actually a strike, right? It was the bombing attack. So later on, I think in some other media, I read that the journalists were told not to say certain things and not to say certain things. So this major coverage, I mean, I work in development, I traveled in many countries, even like illiterate farmers, when there is a demonstration happening in the countries, they don't only listen, they actually would listen to the radio of the neighboring countries. Because they told me that the radio inside is basically a government propaganda. To get the correct picture, I need to listen to others, neighboring countries, BBC, Voice of America. So that much awareness actually in lot of developing countries. But in US, what I find, there is a lack of interest to really understanding what is outside, what is actually happening. So my two questions, is it actually from the listener side that the majority of Americans don't want to know? Their world is US, it's a big country, lot of resources, rich, etc. They really don't know what is outside. And it's very isolated. There are two big oceans around it. So you don't have that much of a border to listen what is happening. And the other thing is, why is this culture in the media that where does this come from? Some people right now are self-censoring, I know, but it is always in the media. You are not going to learn from the media actually what is happening for the Palestinian people. That's my question. And thank you so much. I really, I have a lot more questions. Probably later I will ask you about your project, where you got funding, and what happened that you have been working with literally agents all these years, but the book did not get published by them. Thank you.
I just saw the cut the mic sign, so I'll answer briefly. You're right. America is a huge country, and it's very possible to live your entire life in your state and not even need to encounter other minority groups, even let alone people outside the world. But I will tell you from decades now of personal experience that talking about Palestine to American audiences, that as ignorant as, well, as uninformed as many Americans are, once they hear the truth, they are changed like any human being would be. And I've experienced that in every address I've ever given. And so I wouldn't blame the American citizen per se, because that citizen, if taught the right information, would have a different consciousness.
So we have room for one more question, and then we'll not close the office at 8, but like we'll conclude at 8, and then feel free to mingle and chat while I break my fast.
Hi, Anam Rahim. We met at the Gaza Champions event. I'm also someone who lived in Gaza for 5 years, and I came back to the US 2 years ago, and among other things I'm working on a memoir about my time in Gaza, and I want to just tell the stories of my friends and coworkers, kind of for the same purpose of just sort of uplifting humanity and normalizing these people. And I guess where I struggle with my writer's block is this, there's so much to say. And finding that balance of knowing that, you know, oppression is a big part of life in Gaza, but also the people of Gaza are more than their suffering. And I'm wondering just like how your writing process, how you kind of, what balances you had to strike in your storytelling. I think there's also a, you know, there's that perfect victim narrative too, of where we also, you know, there's a tendency to want to romanticize the oppressed as these sort of superhuman angels.
Mm.
But they're not, right? They're just as human as me. They're just as flawed as you and I. So I guess I'm just wondering, like, how did you walk that line with the nuance in your storytelling?
I'm going to say I took the easy way out, but that's only facetious. I mean, my driving principle in in this book was to tell their stories. Let them tell their stories. You'll find I'm almost nowhere in the book unless when they happen to bring my name up. And so I didn't have to wrestle with what to say, because I was just saying what they told me to say, and I rendered it in a way that I hope is comfortable. So if you're, and I guess I really can't speak to a different method because I've not tried a different method. But if you choose to prioritize the voices of the people that you're writing about, then the challenge is just which of the many stories you have heard or experiences you've personally had do you think are going to be the most compelling to the reader? Drama is part of that. You want dramatic stories, of course. These books need to be kind of page turners, so there's a strategy in how you end a chapter and begin another. But I would endorse the method of being a voice for them, if that fits your intention.
Thank you very much, everyone, for sticking around, and thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry, Fadi.
Yeah.
I've never done this before, but my families are in desperate need. And they are the last people who would ever ask for money, but they need it badly. I have two GoFundMe campaigns, one for Hussam's family, one for Khalil's family. And those QR codes, I think, are out on the book table. I'm handling the financing for Hammam's family. And if you felt like you wanted to help his family and would trust me with your dollars, I'll be sure to get them to them.
Thank you so much. I was going to mention that as well, that you can please support the families that Professor Brian has wrote about at the front, and we hope that you can buy signed copies of his book. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and for sticking around. And Professor Barber, especially for giving a human dimension to a people who have been so reported on every single day for the past 560 years, 560 days, I mean, but so rarely have actually been told their own stories and their experiences. So to that, we owe you the deepest of appreciation and gratitude. And please, everyone, give us a great round of applause. Professor Brian. Thank you to our online listeners as well. And signed copies are available. Please purchase them.
Not yet
And-
signed, but I'm happy to do it.
And there's a lot of food as well. So please help yourselves. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. يعطيك العافية.